You know, in the world of true crime, some names become more than just names. They become shorthand for pure evil. And in 1960s Britain, two of those names were Brady and Myra Hindley. Their crimes, which we know as the Moors murders, didn't just shock a nation, they completely changed how people understood depravity. So let's get into how that happened.
To really get this story, we're actually going to start at the end, with the judge's final words on the matter. Two sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. That one sentence, it really just says it all, doesn't it? These weren't just murders. No, these were calculated, cruel acts that would leave a permanent scar on the public consciousness. So you have to ask yourself, how does something like this even happen? How do a quiet office clerk and a seemingly religious typist team up to become a murderous duo? Well, to understand the crimes, we have to first understand them and the twisted bond that held them together. I mean, at first glance, they were a really unlikely pair, working together at a chemical company. He was a clerk, came from a troubled background in Glasgow, had even spent time in Borstal, which was a kind of youth detention center. And she was a local girl from Manchester, a typist, and by all accounts was actually quite religious. But underneath all that, their meeting in 1961 was like striking a match. It just ignited this shared darkness that would end up consuming them and, of course, their victims.
Hindley herself described Brady's influence over her as just absolute. She fell completely under his spell. She changed her looks, she abandoned her faith, all to adopt his dark, nihilistic way of seeing the world. As she put it herself, his power was so complete, he could have told her the earth was flat, and she would have believed him without a second thought.
So, what brought them together? It wasn't love, not in any normal sense. It was this shared fascination with power and cruelty. I mean, look at this list. They were reading up on Nazi atrocities and the Marquis de Sade, not as history, but like it was an instruction manual. From there, they started planning bank robberies, getting their hands on guns. They were building this private fantasy world where they were in charge, and everyone else was just a potential victim.
And, it was only a matter of time before that dark fantasy world spilled over into a horrifying reality. Between July of 1963 and October of 1965, their obsessions turned deadly. So over the next 2 years, 5 young people would just vanish. Pauline Reed, she was 16. John Kilbride, 12. Keith Bennett, also 12. Leslie Ann Downey, only 10 years old. And Edward Evans, 17. The pattern was just sickeningly consistent. Hindley, being a woman, would use her non-threatening presence to lure a child or teenager into their car. And from there, they were taken, assaulted, and murdered by Brady. Their lives were cut short in the most brutal way imaginable.
But here's what made these crimes so uniquely cruel, so different. It wasn't just the murders, it's what they did after. They would drive their victims out to this vast, empty, desolate place called Saddleworth Moor. It became their private cemetery, a place where they buried these kids in shallow graves, hoping the landscape would just swallow their secrets forever.
So how did it all end? You might think it was some brilliant police work, but it wasn't. Their campaign of terror seemed totally unstoppable, but it unraveled all because of one terrified witness to their very last murder.
Okay, so picture this. It's October 6th, 1965. Brady lures a 17-year-old named Edward Evans back to their house. Then Hindley goes and gets her brother-in-law, a 17-year-old kid named David Smith, to come over. Smith walks in, hears screams, and sees Brady brutally attacking Evans with a hatchet and then strangling him. Imagine being him. Terrified, he flees the house and makes the phone call that finally brought their reign of terror to an end.
When the police searched their house, what they found was just a treasure trove of horror. An exercise book with John Kilbride's name in it, a left luggage ticket which led them to suitcases at a train station, and inside those suitcases, it's just unimaginable. Pornographic photos of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, and a chilling 16-minute audio tape, a tape of her torture. They also found these landscape photos of Hindley out on the moor, which later turned out to be twisted markers for the grave sites.
In the middle of all this horror, this investigation into the torture and murder of children, the detectives noticed something really, really disturbing. The only time Myra Hindley showed any genuine emotion, we're talking tears, real heartbreak, was when she learned that her dog had died while in police custody. Her grief over an animal, right next to her absolute coldness about her human victims, it was a deeply chilling look into her mind.
So Brady and Hindley get convicted in 1966 for 3 of the murders. But for the families of 2 of the victims, Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, the nightmare was really just beginning.
20. 20 years. For 2 whole decades after they were locked up, Brady and Hindley held on to this one last cruel secret. They denied everything about Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. They left those families trapped in this agony of not knowing. Just think about that. 20 years of silence, of false hope, of just unanswered questions.
But the victims' families, especially Keith Bennett's mother, Winnie Johnson, they never, ever gave up. Her letters to Hindley were just desperate, but so dignified. She just pleaded for help, and in doing so, she kept the case in the public eye and put this relentless moral pressure on the killers.
And then, in 1987, after all those years of lies, Hindley finally cracked. She confessed to her involvement in all 5 murders. The police actually took her back to Saddleworth Moor, and the information she gave them led them right to the body of Pauline Reed, a full 24 years after she'd been killed.
But even that confession only brought partial closure. Because despite all the searches, they've searched on and off for decades, the body of 12-year-old Keith Bennett has never been found on Saddleworth Moor. It is the case's most painful, unresolved wound. A family that's been denied even the small comfort of a proper burial.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Why does this case, more than half a century later, still have such a powerful, dark grip on the public imagination?
Well, even their decades in prison were starkly different. You had Brady, diagnosed as a psychopath, who basically leaned into his own notoriety. He made it crystal clear he never wanted to be released. On the other hand, you had Myra Hindley. She spent decades claiming to be a reformed Catholic, fighting for parole, arguing she wasn't a danger anymore. That campaign kept her in the headlines and just fueled public outrage right up until she died.
One of the most chilling things came from one of her later confessions. She admitted something huge. She said that her role was maybe even more sinister than Brady's. And why? Because she was the one who lured the children. She used her femininity, the fact that a woman seems safe, to gain their trust. It was a betrayal of the most basic human instinct to protect the young, and it's what cemented her status, for many, as the most evil woman in Britain.
The Moors' murders left an indelible scar. It's this combination of things, isn't it? The casual, unimaginable cruelty of the killers, the desolate, haunting backdrop of the moor, and of course the unending grief of Keith Bennett's family. It all comes together to create this lasting, chilling benchmark for human depravity. It forces us to confront a kind of darkness that for most of us remains utterly and thankfully incomprehensible.